It's my dinner with the farting alien of Raxacoricophalopatorius. Welcome to the Time Treadmill. I'm Ron, and these are my sweaty thoughts about Doctor Who. Well, that was kind of annoying. The good thing about physical media is that it doesn't go away. You can't lose your license to watch it. The streaming service can't decide to stop airing it. Once you have it, you have it. The bad thing about physical media is if it's damaged in any way, it's damaged. As near as I can tell, the fourth disc of my Season 1 set has some kind of blemish on it, and when I tried to play Boomtown, the entire pre-credits scene didn't show, the opening credits didn't show, so I came into the story several minutes into it, which, I mean, I've seen it a couple times before, I know what happened, that's not a problem, but that does mean that my time on the treadmill was shorter than usual, because it was about 10 minutes shy, and I missed some of the setup in real time, so I have to think back on what it is I missed. So all of that's kind of annoying. But setting all my personal first world problems aside, I will say that Boomtown is probably the one Slitheen story I actually like. And one of the reasons I like it is it's mostly a talking episode. It's a character development episode. Yeah, the plot is that Margaret, the one Slitheen from Aliens of London and World War III, somehow managed to survive the bombing of 10 Downing Street and run off to Wales and become the mayor of Cardiff. And she has an evil plot where she's going to build a nuclear reactor on top of the rift and then blow up the rift and ride the blast to safety off-world using some magical whatever device. Okay, sure. And, of course, the TARDIS team finds the threat and thwarts it, and they're going to take Margaret back to Raxacoricophalopatorius to be tried and sentenced to death. That's all well and good. That's kind of a typical Doctor Who episode. But the interesting part of that is all of the stuff that normally happens in an episode happens in the first few minutes. By a couple of minutes into the main story, the Slitheen has been captured and they're ready to take her back, but the TARDIS is low on power. It's actually parked on top of the rift to charge up. And so they have an overnight before they can take off again. And that is the time that is spent with Rose and Mickey sorting out their relationship, and Mickey, to his credit, finally growing a pair and walking away and recognizing that it's a relationship that's never going to happen. And fault doesn't even matter. It's just the way it is. But also, more interestingly, the Doctor is forced to sit down and have dinner with the last Slitheen. And yeah, there's some comical elements to the dinner where she tries a couple of different ways to assassinate him that of course he foils. But beyond that, it's a talking examination of, again, what happens in the aftermath of the Doctor. And what happens to the villains that he leaves behind. And in what ways is his moral ethical code different than that of the people he's defeating? And there's a lot of nuance there. It's an interesting conversation. And all of that happened really because of budgetary reasons and script reasons. See, originally this story wasn't supposed to be that at all. It was a completely different story that was commissioned, and then for a variety of reasons, the scriptwriter wasn't able to deliver the finished manuscript, which would have been a story about the Doctor and Rose, and how the Doctor actually engineered Rose's life to create the perfect companion, which is an interesting concept. And honestly, I'm not sure how that would have played, how it would have gone down, how it would have affected the Doctor's character, but wow, it's an interesting concept. But because that script didn't happen, there was a need to fill in this space in the airing order with a new story on short notice. And because The Long Game was originally supposed to be a Doctor Light episode to save on budget, but then the story was expanded to include more of the Doctor and Rose, so not as much budget was saved there. They were left with a slot of an episode to fill with a minuscule budget, which means they had to do something with the bare minimum of special effects, with the bare minimum, ideally using only existing sets and locations and not building anything new, and tossed into all of that mix was Russell T Davies' desire to show off Cardiff and Wales in a positive light. The modern production of Doctor Who for many, many years was based right there in Cardiff, Wales. And about 9 years ago, my wife and I actually got to go and visit there and stay in a hotel right off the Royal Dahl Plaza. And I spent so much time walking around recognizing this spot and the other spot. And I absolutely know the exact restaurant where the Doctor and Margaret have their dinner, and so many other locations in this story. But the key point from a budgetary standpoint, because I'm not trying to flex on my traveling, that was... yeah. Anyway, I will just thank my wife for putting up with a Doctor Who fan. We spent most of that trip visiting Jane Austen sites and real proper historical sites. And then we spent a couple of days geeking out over Doctor Who. But my mind is wandering. Back to budgetary considerations. Because this was all filmed on existing locations in and around Cardiff, first of all, I got to show off how really cool the Royal Dahl Plaza is. If you ever have a chance to visit Wales and go to Cardiff, I highly recommend that neighborhood. It's fantastic. It wasn't in this story, but I'd also recommend visiting the castle in Wales, which is also really, really cool. But in any case, they were able to film this in and around the schedule of other episodes. They were using standing sets and locations, so they saved budget there. It featured Margaret the Slitheen, but she never really transforms, except for one point at the climax where she sheds part of her arm and shows the Slitheen arm, but they never have to do the full-body Slitheen effect. This is a really proper budget-saving episode that manages to not only work within its limits, but excel because of the constraints put upon it. It was forced to be a character story, and because of that, it's actually genuinely entertaining. So, is Boomtown my favorite episode of all time? Not even close. It's a mid-tier story in the grand scheme of things. It's certainly my favorite Slitheen story across all media. And I admire, from a technical standpoint and from a logistical standpoint, what they were able to pull off with this story. Now, the one other thing I wanted to talk about briefly is Captain Jack. He is in this story as a proper traveling companion. This is one of the few stories where we see him not in the 1940s airman's uniform. He's actually in some kind of other casual clothes, and at the time it was totally normal. At this point, looking back, really weird to see Captain Jack not in his iconic blue jacket. But story-wise, more important than that, knowing all of the stories going forward, at the point this story is happening, not only is Jack there with the Doctor and Rose and Mickey and Margaret the Slitheen, but a slightly older version of Jack is also there in Cardiff, right there in the Royal Dahl Plaza, underground, running Torchwood 3, in which he is keeping all of his employees underground and avoiding any contact with his past self in order to not create any kind of paradox. On top of that, yet another version of Jack is in cryogenic suspension buried underground and waiting to be released for a future story. So there are no fewer than 3 Captain Jacks in the immediate vicinity during the course of this story, because it ain't Doctor Who if it's not timey-wimey and wibbly-wobbly. So that wraps it up for Boomtown. Tomorrow I begin the end of the 9th Doctor era, and lucky me, it's a Dalek story. Swell. I'll see you tomorrow.